Prague in the late 1500s was complicated. On the surface, a jewel of Central Europe, golden spires, bustling markets, music drifting across the Vltava. But beneath the charm, narrow streets clogged with mud, a fair chance of plague, and, if you were unlucky, a tax collector at your door. And unlike the plague, the tax collector always came back. The Jewish quarter was a world within a world. Children played in streets barely wide enough for 2 donkeys to pass. Women bartered for bread while keeping one wary eye on the gate, because at any moment, rumor or riot could come crashing through. Still, there was laughter, weddings, the smell of fresh loaves from clay ovens, resilience woven into daily life. It was survival, with a touch of joy. And if joy sometimes required ignoring the smell of your neighbor's goat, well, so be it. Inside the ghetto walls, life was noisy, messy, human. Vendors shouted in 3 languages at once, competing with clanging church bells and the occasional drunken fiddler who thought every street corner was his stage. Homes leaned over the cobblestones so close that if you leaned out your window too far, you might end up eating your neighbor's soup by accident. But there was also tension, thick as smoke. Everyone knew safety here was a fragile illusion. A child's cough could turn into whispers of plague, a merchant's misstep into accusations of fraud. And if a Christian baker burned his bread, well, somehow the rumor could twist itself into a Jewish conspiracy by nightfall. It didn't take much, just fear, wine, and a crowd looking for someone to blame. And so the Jewish quarter lived between light and shadow, a place of joy and learning, but always under threat. The people lit candles on Sabbath and sang ancient songs, knowing full well that one day those same flames might be needed to keep watch at the gate. It was in this world of balance, between resilience and fear, laughter and suspicion, that the legend of the Golem would take root. Every community has its wise man, the one people turn to when things get confusing, frightening, or just plain absurd. In Prague's Jewish quarter, that man was Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, though most simply called him Rabbi Loew. Titles were nice, but in practice, when your neighbor thinks his cow is possessed or your son refuses to study, you don't shout for the Maharal of Prague. You shout for the rabbi. Rabbi Loew was no ordinary teacher. He was a scholar whose mind wandered comfortably from scripture to philosophy, from Hebrew prayers to the newest whispers of science drifting up from Italy. His study was a fortress of scrolls and candlelight, with ink stains marking more battles fought on parchment than any soldier ever saw in the field. People said he hardly slept, preferring to spend nights bent over books thick enough to knock a man unconscious. He studied Torah, of course, but also ethics, mathematics, astronomy. And then there were the rumors. The idea that his studies reached into Kabbalah, the hidden knowledge of letters, numbers, and mysteries best left to angels. Did he really read the stars like other men read the market prices? Did he really know the secret names of God, syllables too dangerous for ordinary tongues? Hard to say. In Prague, a story repeated twice was already halfway to fact, and by the 3rd retelling, someone's cousin swore they'd seen it with their own eyes. But, true or not, the effect was the same. Rabbi Loew wasn't just a teacher. He was a figure of awe, a man you approached with reverence. And in dangerous times, he was something even rarer. A man people believed could bend the invisible forces of the world itself. And when fear began to press hard against the gates of the ghetto, belief was just as powerful as fact. One night, Rabbi Loew left his study and walked toward the riverbank. With him were 2 of his most trusted students, men who had no doubt agreed eagerly before realizing that assisting in the creation of life meant digging in the mud at midnight. The Vltava was quiet, its dark waters reflecting a thin slice of moon. Lanterns swung at their sides, throwing golden circles into the night as the men stooped to claw clay from the earth. Slowly, painfully, they molded it into the shape of a man. Though man feels too small a word. This was something larger, heavier, with shoulders like carved stone and arms thick as tree trunks. Piece by piece, the form grew. The students heaved lumps of clay until their backs ached, sweat mixing with the damp river air. Rabbi Loew oversaw each detail with the precision of a craftsman and the gravity of a priest. When at last the figure lay finished, it stretched out on the ground, silent and immense. Then came the moment that legends cling to. Rabbi Loew bent close, whispering sacred words, words said to carry the power of creation itself. His hand hovered near the brow of the clay figure, fingers trembling as though he stood on the line between daring and blasphemy. A candle flame flickered. The students held their breath. For a moment, nothing moved. The figure was only mud, heavy and cold. But then its chest shifted, a slow rise, a heavy fall. Dust stirred around its body. Its eyes cracked open, glowing faintly, like embers in a dying fire. The students stumbled back in terror. They had come to help their master shape clay. Instead, they watched it rise. And thus, with mud, sweat, and a touch of divine audacity, the Golem of Prague opened its eyes. At first, the creature moved like wet stone, trying to remember how to be human. Each step was slow, deliberate, the weight of its body pressing into the cobblestones. Dust fell from its shoulders with every motion. Its blank clay face gave nothing away. No anger, no joy, not even confusion. Just emptiness, punctuated by those faintly glowing eyes. The students gasped. One nearly dropped his lantern, the other muttered a prayer under his breath as though reminding God that this hadn't been his idea. Rabbi Loew alone stood steady, hands folded, as if watching a plan unfold exactly as intended, though one suspects even he hadn't rehearsed this part in detail. When commanded, the golem obeyed. It carried stones as though they were feathers, lifted water barrels that usually took 4 men, and followed its master's word with the silence of a shadow. Silent, tireless, unstoppable. The perfect servant, assuming your needs fell somewhere between guard duty and demolition work. When the people of the ghetto first saw it, their reactions ranged from awe to absolute terror. Children peered from behind skirts, wide-eyed, while merchants crossed themselves in nervous habit. The sight of a hulking clay giant walking calmly through your neighborhood tends to override the finer points of theology. But it didn't take long for whispers to turn into relief. For the first time in years, families slept without glancing anxiously at the gate. The golem watched the streets, stood sentinel at the doors, and loomed so convincingly that even the drunkest troublemaker sobered instantly at the sight of it. And soon, the story spread. Some swore they saw it patrolling rooftops. Others claimed it could vanish into thin air. One neighbor insisted it had once caught a thief by simply standing still until the man fainted from fear. Legends multiply quickly in a city like Prague, and a giant clay man was too good a story to stay quiet. But to the people inside the ghetto, the truth was simpler. The golem was their protector. A mute, expressionless, somewhat unsettling protector, but protection nonetheless. For a while, the golem was everything Rabbi Loew had hoped for. It guarded the ghetto gates, carried heavy loads, and scared off troublemakers without uttering a single word. No drunken brawl, no midnight raid, no hostile rumor made it past that blank stare and those smoldering eyes. But protection without judgment is a dangerous kind of safety. The golem followed commands with perfect loyalty, and terrifying efficiency. If you asked it to stop an intruder, it stopped him. Permanently, if necessary. If you ordered it to move a cart, it moved the cart, and sometimes the wall behind it. Subtlety was not included in its skill set. Soon, stories of its strength turned darker. People spoke of bones breaking, walls cracking, men hurled through the air as though they weighed nothing. Each tale grew taller with the telling, of course. Prague was never short on gossip. But even stripped of exaggeration, one truth was clear. The golem was not a man. It could defend, but it could not hesitate. It could act, but it could not choose. Inside the ghetto, families still felt safer, though many crossed the street rather than walk too close to their giant neighbor. Children no longer giggled in its shadow. They ducked behind doorways instead. A protector, yes. A comforting presence? Not exactly. Outside the ghetto, the whispers turned into fear. Witchcraft, people muttered. Dark powers, unnatural things. What kind of man built a creature from clay? And worse, what kind of city let him keep it? Even Rabbi Loew himself, it is said, began to feel uneasy. He had asked for a shield. What he got was a weapon. And weapons once made are not so easily put away. The story says that Rabbi Loew watched his creation more closely with each passing day. The golem obeyed, yes, but too completely. It never paused, never questioned, never showed even the faintest flicker of mercy. A servant without a soul is not a servant at all. It is a blade. Sharp, useful, and always dangerous to hold for too long. And so, one Sabbath evening, Rabbi Loew brought the golem into the synagogue. The candles burned low, their glow stretching shadows up the walls. The giant stood before the Torah ark, still and silent, as if awaiting a command. His students lingered at the edges, their fear barely hidden. Rabbi Loew stepped forward. He reached for the creature's brow, the place where life had been written into clay. His hand moved slowly, almost tenderly, as though erasing not just a letter, but a part of himself. The golem's eyes dimmed. Its chest, which had risen with the rhythm of false breath, fell still. A shudder passed through its body, and then the weight of earth reclaimed it. The giant slumped forward, collapsing onto the stone floor with a sound that seemed far too final. The students gasped. Rabbi Loew stood silent, staring down at what remained. Not a guardian, not a monster, not even a servant. Only clay. They carried it to the attic of the old new synagogue, where light barely touched the beams and dust gathers like memory. There it was laid to rest, silent once more. And perhaps, as the story whispers, it still lies there. The Golem of Prague never really left. Sure, the clay collapsed, the attic gathered dust, and centuries rolled on. But the story, that stayed. It moved through the city like gossip at a market stall, faster than fact, harder to kill, and much more entertaining. For some, the tale is a sermon. Don't meddle in creation. Don't overstep your bounds. For others, it's comfort. When danger closed in, the community dreamed up a protector. And really, who wouldn't sleep a little easier knowing your night watchman doesn't need wages, rest, or even shoes? Over the years, plenty of travelers have crept into the attic of the old new synagogue, hoping to see a shadow in the dust. They come out with nothing but cobwebs, and usually a newfound respect for how dark attics can be when you're alone. Yet, the golem lives on, not in clay, but in the imagination, retold in sermons, painted in books, staged in plays. Prague has never been short on legends, but few have the staying power of a silent giant built from mud. It's hard to compete with that kind of marketing. And so the tale remains. Part warning, part comfort, part entertainment. Was the golem real? Was it only a story? In Prague, those questions hardly matter. What matters is that 4 centuries later, people are still talking about it. And for a creature made of clay, that's not a bad legacy.